because President Roosevelt dedicated this bridge in the late 1930s. He gave a very famous speech here, Quarantine the Aggressors. This speech led to a program called Lend-Lease, by which the United States provided Asian destroyers to Great Britain, and was very important in the early years and run up to what would become World War II. I'm going to work your left-hand side first. We'll cover the right-hand side on the way back. On your left, folks, this is a neighborhood of expensive apartments, condominiums, hotels, entertainment venues, and more. First building I'd like to bring to your attention, these three towers to your left. One is shorter, one is medium, and one is very tall. That is called the Regus, 101 stories high. The Regus, condominium, apartments, commercial. The architect of that amazing building, 5 foot 2 inch tall, Jeannie Gang. She's an architectural genius, winner of the Pritzker Prize for Architecture. The curves in that steel are to reflect the movement of water on the lake and the river. There are 6 different shades of blue in the glass panels. About 14 stories down from the top, it's hard to see because of the sun, there's an opening. That's called a blowhole. Folks, all the tall buildings in Chicago, we've got plenty of them. They all do a little shimmy, shimmy, cocoa bop. When the winds blow, they all move just a little bit. So, to avoid that movement, if you lived there, you wouldn't want to know that you were moving back and forth if you haven't had anything to drink yet. We left that open. It's called a blowhole. The winds come through there. You don't feel the building move at all. Jeannie Gang. Next on your left is a rectangular glass, clear and opaque glass wall coming out to us at an angle. That is the Swiss Hotel in the city of Chicago, currently the only Swiss hotel in the United States. The architect deceased, Harry Weiss Jr. Harry was a sailor, and he always tried to get his clients to let him work sailing themes into the project. So what appears to be a rectangular glass wall will turn into a triangle, like sails on a ship. We love triangles. Now, directly behind the Swiss Hotel is a building that has beautiful, sensuous curved concrete floors between each level. That is called Aqua, A-Q-U-A. And the architect, that 5 foot 2 inch tall, Jeannie Gang. Every one of those balconies is different in size. Some several inches, some several feet. The building in front of the Aqua is a rectangular shaped building, dark steel, narrow dark tinted windows, no external decoration. That style is known as International Modern, and we associate that with a German-born architect by the name of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Mies was the last head of the Bauhaus School of Art and Architecture in pre-Nazi Germany. When they took over, they closed his school. He was unemployed for 6 years. He managed to come to Chicago and became the head of the Department of Architecture at our Illinois Institute of Technology. That building is the model and prototype for tall buildings all over the world from the 1960s to the present day. Next on your left, we built the 2 brown brick buildings with the dark vertical windows coming down. That's the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Chicago, Abraham Epstein architect. That hotel has 2,230 sleeping rooms, more than any hotel in the city. Now, right in front of us, you may have noticed a tall glass and steel building with a single mast on top. The architect of that building, that's the second tallest building in Chicago, folks. That's 1,303 feet high, 98 stories high. The architect of that building, my homeboy from Chicago, Adrian Smith, who's the architect of the tallest structure in the world today, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Oh, by the way, the building is also known as Trump Tower. We're going underneath the Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable Bridge. And I know we have a couple of folks here from San Antonio, great city in the Lone Star State of Texas. And on your left, parts of the Chicago River. An idea that we appropriated from San Antonio. The building with the curved front, the Corinthian columns, those columns at the top and the bottom, that's the London House Hotel, 1923. That architectural style is known as Beaux Art, an attempt to recapture the flavor of ancient Greece and Rome. Great cocktail lounge up on the roof. Double-deck roadway in front of the London House Hotel. First double-deck roadway in the United States. And it goes in all four directions, Walker Drive. And if on Wednesday night on NBC TV, you begin by watching Chicago Med, Chicago Fire, Chicago PD before you go to the news. They like to film on the lower levels of Walker Drive quite frequently. Next on your left is a building from 1928. It has a rounded temple at the top, two shorter temples on the left and right. It's called the Jewelers Building. That building actually had an elevator for automobiles. A jewelry salesperson or someone with a lot of glitter could drive their car into that elevator, take you up to whatever floor you wanted to go to. It minimized the chances of a salesperson or someone with a lot of bling being relieved of it involuntarily. Okay, people are enjoying our river walk on a beautiful day like today. At ground where those flags are, that's where we have our memorial to the men and women who gave their lives in the Vietnam War era. This river never freezes over. It's quite busy. We've got kayakers, pleasure boats, and more today. Coming up on your left is this two-tone gray building with those black and silver vertical rods in each window. Those are called mullions. Folks, that building is the Leo Burnett Advertising Agency building. They're one of the largest advertising public relations firms in the world. If some of you started the day with a healthy breakfast, Snap, Crackle, and Pop, Rice Krispies, or maybe Tony the Tiger's cereal, or maybe you had an Egg McMuffin, all of the creative ideas behind those and a couple thousand more products came out of that two-tone gray building, the Leo Burnett Advertising Agency building. Next on your left is a tall white granite building, delicate aluminum fluting in the windows, culminating in a triangle or a pediment at the top. The architect from Barcelona, Spain, Ricardo Bofill. That building is patterned after a column found in Athens, Greece, dated 432 BC. We're going underneath one of the 88 bridges on the Chicago River and its branches. We have more bridges on our river than any city in the United States. 2 more in the great city of Pittsburgh. Next on your left, where these people are sitting, we call that the auditorium. So you might wonder, where's the theater? Folks, we are the theater. To paraphrase the Bard of Avon, all the world's a stage. We're the players of art. Next building on your left has that tall center part, shorter parts to left and right. That's Art Deco. Art Deco, long, narrow verticals, indentation, decoration at the top and the bottom. That building is from 1929, the LaSalle Wacker building. As buildings went higher and higher, cities became concerned about light and air penetrating. So they adopted what we call setbacks. When you reached a certain height, in this case 30 feet, 30 stories rather, you had to level off before you could go any higher. Okay, right in front of us is the Wells Street double-deck bridge. The upper level of, here comes a Chicago elevated train. By the way, we don't use the word elevated in Chicago. We say L-E-L. If you use the word elevated, people will think you're aliens from another orbit. You'll be charged double or triple wherever you go. And the L makes it over around the Central Business District. So we call it Central Business District. The L and the L trains go back to the 1880s. Next on your left is one of several buildings on the river by a New York City architectural firm, Kohn Pedersen Fox. The gray granite building with the Roman arch in the center. That Roman arch is to pay honor to the fact that Chicago was the busiest domestic water port in the United States for over 90 years. We're also the railroad capital of the United States. More freight and passenger cars come through this city than anywhere else. And we have the busiest international airport in the United States, O'Hare Field. Atlanta's Hartsfield International's nipping at our heels, but we'll turn back, or we'll fudge the figures. Next on your left is my favorite building on the river, by the same architects, Kohn Pedersen and Fox. But look at how different the style is. This is what we call contextualism. The architects and developers working with a natural environment. Curves here, 450 feet of curved green glass, 2 shades of green to reflect the green of the river. You can see buildings from the other bank and they're reflected in the glass. Towards the base of the building, green marble, gray granite, cut in ways to resemble decks on a large ship. And there comes the Lake Street L behind that building. It makes a racket. So the developers felt they would not be able to lease out the lower levels at the high rentals they wanted to charge. So they put the utilities down there. Okay, we're reaching the branch north-south and the main branch. And Captain Kelly is taking us up the north branch. On your right, this is called Wolf Point. All of that land is owned by a family. Some of you may have heard of their last name before. Kennedy, like Joe, Rose, Jack, Bob, Ted, and so on. This is an office building going up, but they already completed several years ago this apartment building on your immediate right with the very nice balconies. Oh, 2-bedroom goes for about $4,500 a month. But they have every kind of amenity you'd ever think. In their rec hospitality room, they have 10 giant TV monitors. 3 weeks ago, they had a big fight among residents who would control the remote. The big attraction to living in this building, they have a live-in veterinarian. You have a dog, a cat, a hamster, a ball python, a gecko, and gets sick, they make house calls. Pretty neat. Okay, directly in front of us is a great photo op. A bridge in the upright position. It's been that way for 70 years. Originally built by the Chicago Northwestern Railroad, today they're part of the Union Pacific family. Originally, when it went up and down, there were factories all along the main branch. Okay. Anybody here from the San Francisco area? Have ever been to San Francisco? Of course. The designer of this bridge, a man named Joseph Strauss. He is also the designer of the Golden Gate Bridge. How does that know that? There was a question on Jeopardy about a month ago. Okay. This custard-colored building on your right was a bridge tender's house. Originally, all of these bridges were controlled by human beings. Now they're all controlled by computers. Our bridges are called bascule bridges. B-A-S-C-U-L. Bascule is a French word. It means seesaw or teeter. The bridges open up in the middle, swing up to the right, up to the left, and hopefully return. On your right, folks, this building is from 1987. It's called the East Bank Club of Chicago. Now that building went up in 1987, Ezra Levin architect. It was the first new building on the north branch of the river in over 40 years. When it opened up in 1987, no ivy, no trees, no flowers, no windows. Just ugly concrete. So ugly we called it brutalist. But this is Chicago's premier social and athletic facility. All the powerful and beautiful people in Chicago belong to the East Bank Club. And those who would be beautiful and powerful also belong to the East Bank Club. It's open 18 hours a day. Drive your car in the morning. You could have it washed, waxed, oiled, and lubed while you're being oiled and lubed. Every kind of physical torture machine imaginable behind those walls. Also shops to shop in, restaurants to eat in, and much more. The East Bank Club of Chicago. So as I may have mentioned, when that opened up, it led to redevelopment on the river. So on your right here, there's a red brick building with metal balconies. This is an example of adaptive reuse. The building originally was a Baltimore and Ohio railroad warehouse. When the B&O vacated, developers moved in. They kept the 14-foot high ceilings and they added those metal balconies. Cities like Chicago, that's a dead giveaway. An older building with metal balconies, yuppies have taken over this area. And no geezer like me, I'm jealous. About $300,000 gets you a one-bedroom and the privilege of watching tour boats come by 9 months a year, barges 12 months of the year, and much, much more. Then if you have a car, you want to park in the garage, added in the late 1990s, currently that's $275 a month. Seem outrageous? Maybe in Ohio, but not if you're from San Francisco, LA, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, then it's like a free. Coming up next on our right is a rental building with angled glass. The architect of this building, who happens to be deceased also, was a man named John Cornwell. Mr. Cornwell was a native of England. He was a prisoner in the Second World War. He got out, studied architecture, practiced in England. And then one day, in Covent Garden area, he met a young woman from Chicago. He was smitten. He followed her back here. They were happily married for 52 years. Next on your right, a building with white horizontal steel, white chevrons. The architect Lucien Lagrange from Paris, France. It's called Kinsey, Erie on the Park. Then straight back, there's a building with clear and opaque windows, granite on either end. That building was the executive offices of the Montgomery Ward Corporation. Montgomery Ward started the catalog business in the United States. Set up shop here in the 1870s. The architect of that building, a gentleman named Minoru Yamasaki. Mr. Yamasaki is the architect of the Twin Towers in New York City, 9/11. Today that building is a senior citizen center. So why did Montgomery Ward choose this area? Well, it's the river. It made it easy to load and unload merchandise. Railroad tracks nearby facilitated that. Chicago would become the catalog capital of the world. Headquartered here, not only Montgomery Ward, Sears Roebuck, Spiegel, about 30 other catalog houses. Now, Ward started with the 2-page flyers selling to people in rural America. Within 5 years, he had a several hundred-page catalog, eventually would set up retail stores across the United States, Mexico, and other parts of the world. They lasted until the beginning of this century, when they fell victim to changing consumer tastes and a management that simply couldn't adapt fast enough to the demands of the internet and computer age. Coming up on our right is another building that underwent adaptive reuse. The building here on your right with those Art Deco metal balconies was a Montgomery Ward office building. Built in 1927. The style is called Art Deco. Long, narrow verticals, indentation, decoration at the bottom and the top. We have an ordinance in the city of Chicago. When you build along the river, either new or adaptive reuse, you must create a public pedestrian walkway. So the developers, Papa George and Ames, had to cut out the bottom level of this building to provide that public walkway. Coming up next on our right will be the Montgomery Ward warehouse building. Today it's commercial and condominium. Primary commercial tenant, look in the upper right-hand corner, Groupon. This is Groupon's world headquarters. Probably everybody here has used Groupon at one time or another. Now this building is from 1907. The architectural style is known as Prairie Style architecture. Prairie Style architecture is characterized by long horizontals, short verticals, and some decorations. Those brown appliques, like with the long tails, they're supposed to be grasshoppers. But this year we might end up calling them cicadas. but we haven't seen any yet or heard them in this area. Now, prairie-style architecture. Illinois is the prairie state. You know what that means, folks? We're long and flat. You drive from the Illinois-Wisconsin border on the north to the southern tip of Illinois. That will take you 9 hours. Southern Illinois is further south than Richmond, Virginia. Now, the most famous prairie-style architect was probably Frank Lloyd Wright. He had nothing to do with this building. There were many prairie-style architects. Mr. Wright did very little inside the city of Chicago. He resided in a suburb just west of Chicago called Oak Park. That's where he and his associates developed several dozen homes. That's where he fell in love with the wife of one of his clients. She reciprocated, fell in love with him. Both would leave their spouses, their children behind. They ran off to Europe together, followed by newspaper reporters. It was considered so scandalous. They would both divorce their spouses. They would never marry, but they lived together. And then she and her children would be murdered by a deranged house servant at their estate in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Okay, right behind the boat now where those iron pilings are, the concrete, that's called Goose Island. It is the only island in the Chicago River. It's called Goose Island because the first people to live in that area were immigrants from Ireland in the 1830s. Okay, so let me give you some quick history of this area. As I said, there were only Native Americans here. Potawatomi, Ojibwe, Menominee, until 1673. In that year, a French Catholic priest, Père Jacques Marquette, and a fur trapper by the name of Louis Joliet came through this area looking for a shortcut back to Canada. They claimed all this region for the Empire of France. France wasn't interested. 1754, France and England went to war. We call it the 7-Year War, War for Empire, French and Indian War. England wins. This becomes part of the British colonial empire. The mother country had the nerve to ask those colonists in 13 colonies to help pay for the cost of that war. You know what those folks in Boston did? They dumped that tea in the harbor. That harbor hasn't recovered yet. How do you think the green monster at Fenway Park got its name? Osmosis. The result, the American Revolution. When that war ended, this is the American West. There's nothing west of where we are today that belonged to the young United States of America until 1803, when President Tom Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark on that expedition to the Pacific Northwest. Okay, on your right, folks, this building is known as the Chicago Tribune Building. Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, a very well-known and important architecture and development firm, designed this. Chicago Tribune is one of our 2 daily English language newspapers. Its competitor, the Sun-Times, is printed here. About 38 other newspapers, English and foreign language, printed there. There are 10 huge printing presses in that building. They were all imported from Germany. They all sit on individual caissons which go down to bedrock, solid ground. It's about 65 feet down in this area. Each press could turn out 40,000 newspapers an hour. They hardly ever do anymore because all these young people, they don't know what a real newspaper is. They read it online. They don't know what it's like to get printer's ink on your hand. I asked my 13-year-old grandson, how's your typewriter? He doesn't know what I'm talking about. But when I have a computer problem, I call him up, he walks me through. He's damn smart. Smarter than his grandfather, I'll tell you that. Anyhow, the first immigrants to come here in any large number were the Irish. Ireland had a potato famine in the 1830s. 1/3 of the population would starve to death, 1/3 hopped across the pond, across the Atlantic, and 1/3 stayed behind. Friends, if you're ever here on the 17th of March, it's a big day here, St. Patrick's Day. I've been in Dublin, nothing to do. All they do is drink and go to church. Heck, we do that here all the time. On the 17th of March, at 10 o'clock in the morning, we dyed parts of this river, Kelly Green. When I was a kid growing up here before I went elsewhere, we thought St. Patrick's Day was a national holiday. All the public schools were closed. City Hall was closed. The county building was closed. And none of you are dressed appropriately. Forget about green. It's usually freezing cold here on the 17th of March. So the Irish came. and they brought with them their gift of gab, organization, and their beer. Then in the 1840s, we get Germans. They bring with them the symphony, the kindergarten, their schnitzel, and their beer. Prohibition never had a chance in Chicago. Then in the 1870s and 80s, we get Italians, red wine, limoncello. Okay, then we get East Europeans, vodka as well as beer. Prohibition never had a chance. Breeze feels good, doesn't it? Coming up on our right here will be a development called Kinsey on the Park. This is a private or gated community. Public walkway open to the public from when the sun comes up in the morning until the sun sets. There's a series of townhomes here and apartment buildings behind it. These are all 4 stories high, rooftop decks, elevators. The columns in front are known as Doric, D-O-R-I-C, the simplest form of Greek architectural column. When Papa George and Haynes, the developers of this, announced plans for these in the 1990s at $600,000 each, people laughed and said they would never sell any of them. The river is filled with abandoned buildings, warehouses that are collapsing, the water's all polluted. All 30 townhomes went under contract in 3 weekends. You want to live here today? $1.2 million to $1.4 million. Coming up next on our right, folks, will be the river cottages of Harry Weiss, the sailor architect. There are 4 townhomes here, 6 stories high and 4 stories high. They all have private docking on the north branch of the river. You'll see twisted staircases, rounded windows, all sorts of nautical-related themes. When these were built in 1984, they sold for $450,000 each. One sold 2 summers ago, the one on the end here, for $2.8 million. But Harry wasn't through. He took the salmon-colored brick building with all those windows. That was built in 1907. Had no windows at all. It was a cold storage warehouse. When Harry decided to turn it into condos and apartments, it took 18 months for the building to fully defrost. 5 feet of horsehair insulation, the outer wall and the first inner wall. And then Harry was quoted as saying, it took another 2 years for the smell of rotting fish to get out. Next on your right, 6 townhomes at ground level, 5 levels of parking, valet only, and then all the windows in this condominium on your right all face east. There are no windows facing west. Because when that building went up several decades ago, there were factories and warehouses there, and railroad tracks. Well, the railroad tracks are still there. They bring Amtrak into the city from the north and commuter rail. These folks were not happy about these buildings on your left, so they filed suit all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court. The court ruled against those folks. They said when you bought, you had no guarantee of what your views would be. Okay, on the right here, above the railroad tracks, which are covered, there's a red piece of sculpture designed by a Spanish sculptor, Santiago Calatrava. And then we have a building here on your right, angled at the bottom, very narrow, and then it goes towards the heavens. Why is it so narrow? Because there are railroad tracks on the other side and the river on this side. The architect's Gensler and Associates. On top of that building, folks, there are 4 giant, I call them aquariums. They hold water. What is their function? pushes against it from the west. If it blows from the west, pushes against it from the east. So this is an office building with some very nice restaurants. So people who work in this building don't have to take Dramamine all day. Okay, I know we have some folks here from the Great Pacific Northwest. On your right, there's a tall building with a logo. That is the logo of the Boeing International Aircraft Corporation. This is Boeing's world headquarters. Boeing is the world's largest manufacturer of airplanes and airplane parts. Their headquarters historically had been in the Seattle-Tacoma area. But then in the 1880s, they had a lot of problems, labor and otherwise. They said, we want to get out of here. We want to come to the center of the U.S. We offered them a great deal. So they came here. Now, Ralph Johnson of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill is the architect of this building. This was a difficult engineering project. The building is held up by those narrow two-tone gray pillars at the edge of the building. They go down to bedrock, 70 feet down in this area. And those caissons are anchored alongside sets of railroad tracks because Amtrak and commuter rail comes into Chicago from the north. Challenging engineering architectural project. Next on your right is a building from 1926, 2 North Riverside Plaza, Hollowboard and Root Architects. The shape of this building was influenced by Sir Howard Carter's discovery of King Tut's tomb in Egypt in 1923. The center of the building is supposed to be the chest, or the torso on the Great Sphinx. The lower parts where the clock was, and it says 2 North Riverside Plaza, those are the paws on the Great Sphinx. The Great Sphinx is located in a suburb of Cairo, Egypt, called Giza. When we come out from under this bridge, you can turn your head sharply to the right and look up. You will see what looks like a glass waterfall gently cascading down. That's the Ogilvy Center in Chicago. It's an office building and a commuter rail station. The architect, a man named Helmut Jahn. Helmut was a native of Nuremberg, Germany, came to Chicago at the age of 41. He passed away about a month ago. He was involved in a bicycling accident and he died of injuries. But if any of you flew into Chicago, and you came through the United Airline Terminal, if you've ever seen our State of Illinois building, and much more. The library in Michigan City, Indiana, for example. All done. On your right are a series of black steel and iron buildings, dark tinted windows, no external decoration. All done by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. Now, they have done thousands of buildings like this all across the world. Critics of their style call Skidmore, Owings & Merrill 3-lined mice. We're near the Union Station in Chicago. It's 1 block from the river. At one time, Chicago had 10 major rail depots. Now we have one, our Union Station. It's where Amtrak trains coming from the south, east, west, and north all meet. Now, coming up next on your right is an interesting 1-story building with X bracing. This originally was a stock exchange building designed by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. People who worked in the stock market area before they used computers did not want interior columns in their buildings because they jumped around and used all sorts of hand signaling and other motions. So Skidmore, Owings & Merrill experimented with X bracing to keep the building up. It worked. If you visit the Hancock Center, 875 North Michigan and Delaware, you'll see a 100-story building with X bracing. This was the prototype for that. This building on your right is the last of the Gateway Center buildings, but it's not perfectly rectangular. They even have a curve in the area. The architects Skidmore, Owings & Merrill were practicing some contextualism using the natural lay of the land when they designed this building in the late 1980s. Now, coming up next on our right is a building from 1933, 2 square blocks in size. This was Chicago's main post office. It was actually the world's largest central post office from 1933 until 1995, when it went under adaptive reuse. Now, this building actually has a federal interstate highway that goes right through the middle of that building. It's called Interstate 290, the Eisenhower Expressway, named for former President Eisenhower, who was the father of our interstate highway system. By the way, he's a native of Denison, Texas. I know we've got a bunch of Texans here. The second most famous person to come from Denison, Texas, retired Air Force pilot Sully Sullenberg, who landed that jet plane in the Hudson River several years ago. Now, why does Chicago need such a large central post office? Well, we like things big in Chicago. Number 2, we're the catalog center of the world. Any idea how many wish books and catalogs were sent out of here? How many orders were sent out of here? Probably jillions. Today, this building is the headquarters of Walgreen Drug, Pepsi-Cola, Ferrara Candy, and many other companies. Coming up on your left there is a new neighborhood in Chicago. It's called South Bank. We have 78 neighborhoods currently. We soon have 79 and 80. This area, 15 years ago, abandoned warehouses, homeless encampment, and more. Today, apartments, condominiums, townhomes here. There'll be a park where that man's walking on the bridge, and so forth. To buy into this area, $500,000 for a studio, up to almost $2 million for a 3-bedroom. But on your right, this is our newest main post office. It's called the Cardis Collins Building. She was a congresswoman from the west suburbs of Chicago. The architect's Lester B. Knight, a very good firm. But the building has not met with critical approval. Those of us in Chicago, given our architectural heritage, think it's pretty blah. When the architects went to the General Services Administration and said we need a few million more to make it more interesting, the GSA said no, you'll have to live with what we've given you. Highly unusual. Right, Mr. Holmes? Okay. Coming up next on your left is a very interesting looking building. This is called River City. One of 5 projected buildings, but only one would ever be built. The architect, a man named Bertrand Goldberg. Mr. Goldberg was a student of Mies van der Rohe, studied with him at the Bauhaus in Berlin. But then he rejects Mies's main teaching tenets. Mies preached right angles, steel and iron. Mr. Goldberg said, I draw my inspiration from nature. In nature, I don't see right angles. I see curves, circles, orbs, and arcs. And I like working in concrete, not in steel and iron. So they would be competitors for the remainder of their lives. The shape of those windows, we call them the eyebrows on the south branch of the Chicago River. If you have a boat, you can store it underneath you to storage charges. The first floor of this building has a daycare center, doctor's office, dentist's office, podiatrist, shoe repair shop, small sub-11. You get a 1-bedroom here for about $225,000. There are many students who come here to study at our great universities who, rather than living on their campus, they'll end up buying a unit in that building, and then if they matriculate or if they leave early, they sell it to another group coming in. Okay. On your right, folks, about 4 blocks from where we're at, there's a tall, skinny tower. It's very hard to see. And that is where the second star in our city flag comes from. That's the site of the Great Chicago Fire. So let me tell you a little bit about it. October 8th, Sunday night, 1871. This was a town that had no building code really to speak of. We had 3 inches of rain between June 15th and Sunday night, October the 8th. We were as dry as tinder. On that night, there's a 50-mile-an-hour wind blowing from my left to my right. Half of the firefighting equipment was non-operable, and many of the firemen had been injured on duty fighting many fires that week. The story is that a woman named Catherine O'Leary went out to milk her cow, named Daisy in the court records, at 9 o'clock at night. Is there anybody here that's ever milked a cow? Would you do it at 9 at night? No! Thumbs down. Cows are milked early in the morning, early in the evening. So the story isn't true, probably, but it's a good story. The story is Mrs. O'Leary went out with her lantern, puts the lantern in the straw, grabs a certain part of Daisy's anatomy. Daisy objects, kicks over the lantern breaks, the straw catches fire. Within 2 hours, buffeted by that 50-mile-an-hour wind, logs are flying across this river, and all of the center of Chicago and the near north side, up to where the Lincoln Park Zoo is, will burn to the ground. In a city of 300,000, 100,000 would be left homeless. Maybe 500 people were killed. 4.5 square miles razed. The stockyards and many of the factories were behind our boat down the south branch of the river. Irony of ironies, Mrs. O'Leary's cottage survived the fire. Her cottage faced west, the wind is blowing west to east, the barn burned, Daisy burned, and on the site of Mrs. O'Leary's cottage today, the Chicago Fire Department Training Academy. Where else would you put it? And the next time you hear that song, there's a hot time in the old town tonight. We're not talking about Huntsville, Alabama, folks. We're talking about Chicago. Okay, our captain has turned us around. We're now heading north on the south branch. On your right, at about 1 o'clock high, there's a triangular-shaped roof with a 32-foot-high aluminum statue painted silver. The statue is Ceres, C-E-R-E-S, the Roman goddess of femininity, rain, and fertility. That's where the Chicago Board of Trade is. That's where prices are set on everything you eat, wear, and more. There's been a Board of Trade building there since the 1840s. Then if you come to your left, there's this rectangular condominium building which has different sized balconies. Ralph Johnson, architect. He simply said if everyone has the same balcony, it's boring. Let's give them a choice. We call it the Dot Dash building. If you're chronologically mature to remember early computers and those cards we fed into them, and those hanging chads. Boy, that's been 21 years since we talked about hanging chads. That's like ancient history. So we call it the Dot Dash building. Then, right in front of us, there's a building with 3 glass turrets at the top. That's an office building designed by Cohn Pedersen Fox of New York City. The building is owned by the Texas Teachers Retirement Association. We have bulbs up there, fluorescent bulbs and colored reflectors. When one of our sports teams manages to win, we show the colors of our sports team. Hardly ever at all this year for the Bulls in basketball, Blackhawks in hockey. They couldn't even make the playoffs. Almost a mathematical impossibility. Our men's soccer team went 7 games without scoring a goal. The Bears, wait till next year. The Cubs, they're heading south. But then we've got my team, the Chicago White Sox. 8 games in front of their closest pursuers in the American League. And by the way, I was with the White Sox in 1959 when we won the American League pennant. We lost to Los Angeles Dodgers in the World Series. Hold on. I may not look like a fleet-footed center fielder, Reading terminal lady, okay? I was a beer vendor. That was a great job when I was an undergraduate. Okay, now, the big tall black building with the white antenna on top. That is the Sears or Willis Tower. At one time, for over 40 years, that was the tallest continuously occupied building in the world. 1,454 feet high. Then you add another 300 feet for those white television antennas. On the left-hand side at the 103rd floor, it looks like they're ledges coming out from the building. And that's what they are, the ledges. The elevator takes you up, you walk around inside, then your courage builds, you're going to walk out on those ledges. You'll be standing 3 feet out over the city. Have no fear. In 16 years, we've lost nobody. We've only had one crack. Gorilla Glue took care of it. Okay. The design of that building came from a man named Dr. Fazlur Khan. He was a naturalized American citizen, a native of Bangladesh. 9 separate steel tubes that intersect at various heights. But before we get there, we're going to go past this office building, which has a mosaic on the wall. And where that orange structure is, that's where we are, on the south branch of the river. So get your cell phone ready, get your camera ready, and when we get to the edge of this building, I'll say ready, aim, fire at will. The Willis Tower. The Willis Corporation Insurance Underwriting Company, headquartered in Dublin, Ireland. They underwrite Lloyd's and London and others. Okay, ready, aim, fire at will. Some of you are a little slow. We'll have to do what no other city would do free of charge. Give you a second chance. When we get to the edge of this building, my son-in-law works in this building. He's going back Wednesday, the first time in 18 months. He likes working home. All you're going to have to do when we get to the edge of this building, look straight up. No left, no right. There are 112 elevators in that building.
Yeah.
Miles of conduit.
Oh my God. You go there and buy the
Several hundred restrooms, equally divided between women and men. Sears has no presence in Chicago anymore. Unfortunately, they don't have a presence right here anymore. Probably all of us, not us, our parents, probably shopped at Sears. Okay. Coming up on our right is a building with serrated edges, like your red knight at home. It's an office building. It's called the Chicago Mercantile Exchange Center Building. The developers of that structure said this would be a private sector building. People who work in the private sector have 2 main goals. Number 1, make as much money as you legally can. Number 2, you want a corner office. Think of what a corner office means. Power, prestige, authority, better view. If a building is rectangular shape, you can only have 1 office in each corner, 4 on each floor. By serrating these edges, you can have 4 in each corner, 16 on each floor. Think of all the egos you can take care of. Reduce stress, envy, competition. Put more emphasis on we rather than me. Pretty neat idea. The triple deck windows, that's where the trading floors were located when they did trading here, which they no longer do. Now coming up next on our right is one of my own personal favorite buildings. This is the Civic Opera House of Chicago, the home to Chicago's famous opera company. This building opened up in 1929, 1 week after the stock market crash. Not a good time to open an opera house or anything else. The opening night opera, Pagliacci. We seat 3,800 people for Grand Opera. Only New York's Metropolitan has a larger seating capacity. We're looking at the back of the opera stage. The V in building, that was the Roman style. The building, the opera house itself, is surrounded by offices. lawyers, accountants, insurance people, philanthropic groups like to office in this building. The rentals are considered to be quite reasonable. If you were here in the 1980s and came to the Lyra, you may have seen me, Mr. Edwards. I said see. I didn't say here. I was in 3 productions, 2 Aidas, I carried a spear in each one. The biggest role Ed had, Russian out of Comanche. I and 3 other burly guys in costume carried the table from the right to the left side of the stage. $7 a performance. Got to go to cast party, and once your bit was over, you could leave. Not every opera is worth seeing. On your right, the new Bank of America building in Chicago. Gensler and Associates. The 3 steel columns come together. They go down to bedrock, which is about 55 feet down in this area. This is one of our newest treasures in Chicago. Still quite vacant as companies are beginning to have their employees come back to work. Now coming up next on our right will be a red brick building with ivy on it. Today it's simply an office building, but historically it's a very important site. In the year 1860, the National Republican Political Party held their second national nominating convention in a building on this site. It was called the Wigwam, and they picked as their presidential candidate Abraham Lincoln. He was nominated in the building that was on that site. He wasn't there in person, though. He was notified by messenger. Presidential candidates didn't show up in person until the 1920s. Now they all want to show up. Everybody watches ESPN. Okay, we're coming back to the main branch. Captain Kelly's going to take us into the main branch. On your right, these people are sitting, relaxing, free of charge. It's a very nice patio around there. People like to eat here. They fish here. There's a lot of fish here. I'd be very reluctant to eat any of it. I'm going to work your left-hand side now, folks. This is called Wolf Point, where these buildings are under construction. Land owned by the Kennedy family. This is where Chicago's first permanent settlers lived in the 1820s and 30s. What kind of town was Chicago? 3 saloons, 1 trading post, and supposedly a hotel. No art institute, no religious buildings, nothing of that nature. Coming up on your left is a gray granite building from 1933. Graham Anderson, Probst and White architects. Almost 3 square blocks in size. It's called the Merchandise Mart of Chicago. It was built by the estate of Marshall Field and Company. They were a premier department store. Their catchphrase was, give the ladies what they want. You guys had a good deal. So did we, till the bills came in. Anyhow, it cost $39 million to put that building up. 1933, the Depression, then World War II. The building is never more than 30% occupied. So in 1946, the Field Estate put the building up for sale. Guess who bought it for $13 million? Joe Kennedy. The Kennedys kept it until 1996, when they sold it to a real estate investment trust for $660 million. The bronze heads on pillars facing the building. Important Chicago business week. But when David Letterman broadcast his show from Chicago, he referred to them as giant Pez machines. The building had its own zip code until 5 years ago. And if you're here at dusk, we project pictures from the Art Institute on the facade of that building from projectors on the south branch of the river. Usually about 8:30, 8:45. Okay, all of our bridges, by the way, are patterned after bridges that you find on the River Seine in the city of Paris, France. Next on your left, the Chicago Cut Steakhouse building. This building, aluminum, glass, and steel, is the most environmentally up-to-date building in Chicago. They They actually take water from the river, purify it, use it in their heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, and return it to the river cleaner than when it came out. The next building on our left is known as the Reed Murdoch Building from 1912. This is a building favored by wholesale grocers. Boats could pull up on the water, load and unload, railroad tracks on the other side. Tall center tower with a clock face. There's a water tank underneath that. Is there water in it? I don't have the slightest idea. But many tall buildings have water tanks. They were needed. But that clock face, very important. People didn't have their own wristwatches until the 1920s. How'd you know what time it was? Sunrise, sunset, church bells, clock towers. If you grew up in Chicago like Ed did, you could get your driver's license when you were 16. You never wanted to go into that building. That's our traffic court was. Then you had a problem, your parents probably didn't even know. Okay, next on your left, the RPM Seafood Building. The architect, Walter Netz Jr., he's the architect of the Air Force Academy Chapel, Colorado Springs, Colorado. By the way, do we have any lawyers with us? Even when they're here, they won't raise their hand. They're chicken. We need you desperately, okay? If your firm or you belong to the American Bar Association, that's the headquarters of the American Bar Association. It's like pulling teeth, you have to admit. Okay, next on our left, the Corn Cobs of Chicago, Marina City by Bertrand Goldberg. 2 towers. If you have a boat, park it underneath. Various places to eat and drink over the years. Valet parking only. Studio and 1-bedroom apartments. They're rather small. They're shaped like a piece of pie. Building in the center, today that's the House of Blues, originally a movie theater. Competition. You know, Simon and Garfunkel never could have written The Sounds of Silence on this river. So that is Bertrand Goldberg. He's the student of Mies van der Rohe. I think this is rather interesting. Bertrand Goldberg rejects Mises' teachings. He's the student. The very next building on our left is the last building to be designed by Mies van der Rohe before Mies passes on. Today it's the home to the Langham Hotel, a fancy hotel in London, England, and the American Medical Association. Think of that, folks. Doctors and lawyers within 1 block of each other. Makes some of us nervous. I have both in my family. We should come to Thanksgiving dinner. They haven't even sat down. They're yelling and screaming at each other. It's a riot. Okay, now, Trump Tower on your left. Adrian Smith, my homeboy, Chicago architect. Second tallest building in Chicago. 1,303 feet high. 98 stories high. Tallest building in the world on a concrete foundation. Bottom 2 levels for retail. They've never leased out a store since 2008. 16 floors of a hotel, and then condominiums. It's a beautiful building, folks. Mr. Trump said, people may not recognize it. I'm going to put my name on it. Which he did. It's very controversial, as you can imagine. He's quoted as saying, my name on this building will become as beloved as the words Hollywood over the hills of Los Angeles. Okay, next on our left, the Wrigley Building in Chicago. White terracotta, darker at the bottom, lighter at the top. 1925 to 26. First air-conditioned office building in the world. Patterned after buildings in Seville, Spain. You know, Wrigley started out selling soap. The soap didn't sell very well. Someone said you better put a premium in each box. He chose what became Spearmint Gum. Within 5 years, goodbye soap. Hello, juicy fruit, spearmint, and soap. We're going underneath the Jean-Baptiste Fondu-Sable or Michigan Avenue Bridge. And then coming up on our left will be Tribune Tower. Today it's a condominium building. but it's where the Tribune reporters and editors work. It's a Gothic tower, flying buttresses, all the decoration, Gothic architecture. Then we have this small, one-story glass building with a thin roof. That is the Apple Computer Center in Chicago. The architect, Lord Norman Foster of London, England. But on that site, between 1780 and 1800, a man by the name of Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable. He was Chicago's first permanent non-native resident. He was of a Haitian father, African mother. He married a Potawatomi woman, so we had diversity before anybody ever thought of it. Ah, my alma mater, the University of Chicago Graduate School of Business. Those are the classrooms on the west wall with no windows. How the heck can you have classrooms without windows? It's the University of Chicago. When those business school professors said no windows, we don't want our students looking at the river, and we don't want them listening to Ed. He was an urban studies major. They got their way. Look at their offices. Floor-to-ceiling windows. It's not fair. Next on your left, our version of NBC Tower. Adrian Smith, 1986. From that building for 3 years, Oprah broadcast her show. And then later, Steve Harvey broadcast for 4 years. Okay, coming up on our left, the Sheraton Chicago Hotel. Third largest hotel in Chicago. The largest is the Hyatt Regency on your right, 2,230 rooms. Then the Hilton on South Michigan, 1,500. This has about 1,200 rooms, and then the Palmer House on State Street, about 900. Folks, our hotels, as like many other venues, are just starting to reopen, fighting the pandemic. By the way, when you open a hotel like this, you just don't open the door and flip on the switch. They've got to replace 37,000 batteries, smoke alarms, and TV remotes. They've got to flip 1,000 mattresses, several 100,000 gallons of water into the pools, and vet over 1,000 employees to bring them back. Top 3 floors of that Sheraton Hotel have 18-inch thick bulletproof glass. It's where presidents and heads of state stay when they're in Chicago. Okay, folks, we're on the main branch of the river. Originally, this river flowed into Lake Michigan. We get our drinking water out of Lake Michigan. We have great water. But in the 19th century, we dumped all of our garbage into this lake, human and otherwise. It flowed into Lake Michigan. We had flavored water here before Perrier ever thought of the idea. We also had every waterborne disease imaginable. So in 1880, people that ran Chicago said, we're going to reverse the course of this river. They spent 20 years dynamiting, building canals, creating the bottom of the river. And in 1901, by golly, the river flowed backwards. All of our garbage behind the boat, down that south branch that we were on. Eventually, that goes into the Illinois River. Eventually into the mighty Mississippi, where it moves slowly past St. Louis, down to New Orleans. Those folks were not happy. They filed suit all the way to the United States Supreme Court. The court found Chicago's failed. New Orleans said, well, we'll learn to live with it. But in St. Louis, people were really steamed. They went to see a man named Bush. He said, I've got an idea. We can take that dirty brown water. We can put it into brown tinted bottles. We can put a label on it, Budweiser. We'll send it back to those folks in Chicago. Never quite happened that way. Chicago and St. Louis have been very, very competitive ever since. There's Lake Point Tower, a building that looks like a snake with its head chopped off. The only building on the east side of our Lakeshore Drive. The developers of that building discovered a loophole in our zoning legislation, and they convinced the courts that they were not building on land, but building on air rights. We changed our zoning legislation after that building went up. Okay, we're going underneath the Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Lakeshore Drive Bridge. It's a 37-mile roadway that goes from the far south side to the far north side of Chicago. And then coming up on our left will be Chicago's Navy Pier. And I know that some of you are going to go there. It's a 7-minute walk on dry land. No flying, no swimming is necessary. Navy Pier opened up in 1916, 3,000 feet from the west end to the east end. It handled freight and passenger traffic. In the late 1930s, the U.S. Navy took control of Navy Pier. They closed it to civilians. The Navy took 2 ships, converted them into aircraft carriers. We had a Naval Air Combat Training Station called the Glenview Naval Air Training Station, about 30 miles north of Chicago. And during World War II era, 4,000 combat pilots trained here. They'd fly down and do touchdowns and takeoffs on those aircraft carriers. There's about 100 planes still out there in the lake. We never lost a pilot. But every couple of years, some group will raise money, they bring up one of those planes. They're usually in pretty good shape. It's fresh water, not salt water. The 2 most famous pilots who've ever trained here, former President George Bush and the late nighttime talk show host Johnny Carson. He had a sidekick, Ed McMahon. Ed was a Marine naval aviator. He trained here at Naval Pier. There was also a naval brig and a naval hospital. Folks, this is a magnificent opportunity for you to take a moment. You want to take some pictures of our great skyline. It's a very clear day for us, and I think you'll get some great photos. Anyhow, out on Navy Pier, there are souvenir shops galore, there are restaurants, there's a hotel, there's a very nice rooftop bar, several rides, including the Ferris wheel. The Ferris wheel is very symbolic and important in Chicago. The first Ferris wheel anywhere in the world, here in Chicago, for the 1893 World Fair. Now, the World Fair was located about 8 miles to the south of where we're at, in what is Jackson Park. In fact, the famous Museum of Science and Industry was the Palace of Fine Art for the World Fair. So the people that put that fair on wanted something to symbolize the fair. The first person they approached was a man named Gustav Eiffel. And Mr. Eiffel said, "I built a tower for the Paris Fair of 1890. People seem to like my tower. I'll build you a taller one." Well, basically Daniel Burnham and Company said, "What are we, chopped liver? We want something original." They found an engineer from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, George Washington Ferris. He came up with the concept of the Ferris wheel. And the first Ferris wheel was located in our Jackson Park. That's the 4th large one we've had out here. His predecessor is actually in Branson, Missouri, clogging up traffic even more. It's a fun place to visit. And if you're in town on a Wednesday night, Friday and Saturday, we have about a 15-minute fireworks show at Navy Pier. And they set off the fireworks in this area. You can see it from all over. Okay, Captain Kelly is gently guiding our Fort Dearborn back to our berth. We ask that everyone please remain seated when we arrive there so we can be properly tied and moored. It only takes a minute or 2. I'll be the first one off so that I can say thank you, answer any questions that you may have. Folks, I don't know what your plans are for the rest of your time here in Chicago. But if you're in our Millennium Park Wednesday night, there will be a musical concert, 6:30 until 8 at night. Seating for 3,000, first come, first serve. Another 10,000 sit on the lawn, depending how close you want to get to your neighbor. Next weekend, the Chicago Symphony Grand Park Orchestra will be performing Dvorak's New World Symphony. The Art Institute of Chicago has the 2nd greatest collection of French Impressionist art in the entire world. Only the Louvre in Paris has a bigger and better collection. We have a museum of contemporary art. That's really interesting if you're into contemporary art. But you'll always find it interesting, even if you don't quite understand it. Because the job of the artist, my artist friends tell me, is to make you to think, right? Okay. Every ethnic group in Chicago has a museum. Most of them are worth seeing. And some are free, like the National Mexican Museum of Art. The Field Museum of Natural History on our museum campus. That's where you'll find Sue, the most complete T-Rex dinosaur ever discovered in the Badlands of South Dakota. Named Sue because the anthropologist who led the team that discovered her was named Susan Peterson. There's also the Shedd Aquarium. Feeding at the reef, we have both saltwater, freshwater fish, usually about 10:30 or so in the morning. If you go out to Jackson Park in the Museum of Science and Industry, among other things, you'll find the U-505, the only German U-boat submarine captured intact in World War II. You can spend a week in that museum, you won't see everything. And then food. No one will ever starve in Chicago, not as long as you have plastic, okay? Pizza, you name it. Thick crust, medium crust, thin crust, white pizza if you're from Connecticut, and more. But no one should leave Chicago without trying a Chicago hot dog. I'll describe it with everything on it. A steamed poppy seed dog. All beef. No pork, no veal, no pork. Yellow salad dressing. Neon green pickle relish. Diced onion. A pickle spear. 2 half-moons of tomato. A little sport pepper tucked in either end to give it some zing. Some put on celery, salt, some don't. The only rule in Chicago, no ketchup. I have a 14-year-old grandson. That's all he puts on. I worked with him for almost 2 years. Every Wednesday. 20 minutes on his math, which I have no idea what I was doing, and 40 minutes on how to eat a hot dog. He finally told me 3 months ago, Gramps, no more ketchup. But I'm a vegetarian. All my work. Anyhow, on behalf of our captains, Kelly and Paris, our staff downstairs and upstairs, we hope you've enjoyed your time with us. Come back again. It was great having everybody here. Thank you very much. Take care.